Peter van Heusden is a senior bioinformatician at the South African National Bioinformatics Institute, and he joins us now via our video link from Cape Town. Peter, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Issues around COVID-19 fatigue are gauged through things like surveys. I understand a survey has recently been carried out in two parts. Typically, how do you gauge what people are feeling about something like a lockdown?
So, okay, that's, is being done via focus group surveys, and there have been groups running regular updates on trying to go back to the same types of people time and time again and gauge their feeling about lockdown. So obviously, I don't think it would be surprising at this point to say that we have a lockdown fatigue. Or what is worrying, however, is that this is coinciding with quite an organized campaign of disinformation around COVID-19 being rolled out in the country.
Yeah, it was actually Professor Musamo Shabela from UKZN who said that part of what the country needs to do now is actually focus on things like misinformation. Help us understand how that balance can be struck. On the one hand, you want to tackle misinformation, but on the other, you actually want people to come forward and get the jab, and perhaps the vehicle to do that is through something like vaccine mandatory policies.
Yeah, and my employer, the University of Western Cape, has just moved in that direction. Look, we are going to have to use various approaches to get people vaccinated. There's a couple of things, as a bioinformatician, looking at the sequences of these samples, that is a bit worrying, but we need to be able to have honest conversations. That's really difficult when we have people quite literally spreading lies in our midst. So we need people to adopt vaccines. We need to stay on top of future developments with the vaccine. So we've heard about booster schedules. We've seen what's happening with the Sisonke 2 trial. And scientists are incredibly hard at work trying to understand what this new variant means in terms of specifically the immune response. As the virus is evolving, obviously it's going to encounter people who've either been vaccinated or in South Africa much more likely already had COVID-19. And then the viruses which are able to evade the immune system better will then start predominating. That seems to be what's happening with this variant. So we need to have some tough conversations, because this is like, saying that we are running a race, but we're not running a race alone. We are running against somebody else. And then if we decide, we're tired, we've had enough of this race, there is somebody else in the picture here, the virus. So meanwhile, the two major tactics of those peddling disinformation, and I'm saying disinformation because misinformation is when you're misinformed. This is people who are internationally organized to minimize the danger of the disease, to make out that the people who die have something wrong with them in the first place, that, maybe they are ones who can just be allowed to die because they were going to die anyway, and to make up fear and doubt around vaccines, in some cases, in order to sell their own cocktails of cures that they will prescribe to you. So, this is making it really difficult to have a flexible response to the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we are facing the hoarding of intellectual property and knowledge by companies and some nations, but particularly companies, that is going to be very challenging, because we probably are not looking at having one vaccine regime and then that's the last one we ever need to worry about. We've got an evolving virus and we need an evolving response. And if people basically hold on to the keys to the fort, it's really difficult to work with.
You've mentioned just now that we need to get into a space where we can have difficult conversations. I wonder if you can flesh that out a bit more for us. Yeah, go ahead.
So just before I was listening to the perspective from the South African Union of Students, who was arguing against mandates on the basis that we can have conversations. But now, to have conversations, those conversations need to be informed. I saw a rather embarrassing exchange on Twitter yesterday where a well-known swimmer told the deputy told the DVC of UKZN to go do his research. I'm sorry, but that's not how it works.
Yeah.
We need to have respect for the facts out there, and we need to be educating people about what those are. And those conversations need to happen in many spaces. So we've seen a deplorable lack of support from political leaders and some religious leaders in these conversations. We've seen people go for quick talking points, and even, I'm sorry, your colleagues in the media are very quick to jump on a headline that loses the nuance of the story. And we've seen, as I said, an organized campaign of those who are spreading disinformation to find themselves spaces. So, for instance, people like Dr. Nasiba Kathwada, who's one of the major players in this game, still managing to get slots on major news networks.
Mm. Mm. You know, the reaction to the president's address last night, specifically to this formation of a task team, has come in thick and fast. And among the commentary being ventilated now is that when it comes to issues of vaccines, among the difficult conversations to be had is that it actually shouldn't be a discussion. Something like this is a matter of life and death, and we have enough empirical data to actually substantiate why people should, in fact, go in the direction of introducing mandatory vaccines. To what extent do you agree with that?
That is pretty much the case, and we do that with many other vaccines. However, we've had these anti-vaccine campaigns for years. We particularly saw it with the HPV vaccine, and we need to address these campaigns at source. But yes, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't say, look, it's your choice whether you are vaccinated against polio. I mean, polio is actually, for most people, an incredibly mild illness, but we don't give you a choice to say, oh, well, I will let my immune system have a chance or something like that. We say that if we want to control a disease on a society-wide scale, we have to use the best tool for the job, which is vaccination and widespread and therefore mandatory vaccination.
Mm. The reality, of course, is that there's also going to be a very human response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And by that, I'm alluding to this idea of the novel virus no longer being a novelty in society. Sadly, part of the unintended consequences of that is that people just simply let their guard down. Issues around masks, getting into taxis that are completely packed, being in restaurants, for instance, that are also completely packed. Those realities are seeping into our lived reality as well. In what ways do we make sure that we are not numb to COVID-19, for lack of a better term, as we continue fighting its variations?
Honestly, around this time last year, or definitely October last year, I saw the same sense of numbness. Okay, I mean, when this thing started, when I first heard about it, end of 2019, and I was teaching a course in February 2020, and people thought, this guy's a little bit over the top. Okay, going on about this virus, we hadn't had any cases yet, and then we had the first wave. Then immediately after the first wave, people were talking about herd immunity. Are we over it? People let their guard down. And then remember the devastating scenes we saw in the Eastern Cape.
Yeah.
So what worries me is that we have that. But on the other hand, I mean, even myself, I'm kind of tired. I've had enough of the bad news. So it's very difficult psychologically to basically have the resilience to keep going in the face of what seems to be an endless battle. Okay, so there's a need for a kind of national psychological response as well, not just about the dismissal, but also around just the unprocessed grief of so many things that have been lost. Okay, I'm not obviously lives, but also livelihoods. I mean, my kid that's just finishing matric during this period, and it really is not how matric should have been, But then on the other hand, we need to be actively giving people more tools. So on the question of masks, we've talked about masks, but it's become almost like just a ritual conversation. The quality of masks is a concern. The quality of mask wearing is a concern. And people are shamed sometimes for actually taking these things seriously. So some of this, I feel, is a kind of spiteful reaction due to like not wanting to hear bad news. I mean, you might have encountered in a family that some people say, just don't raise the family problems. Don't raise the story about that drunk uncle who performs inappropriately and stuff like that. Let's kind of be quieted. Actually, we have to have these difficult conversations, and how do we give ourselves the psychological space to do so? That is that I think is a challenge that we have barely scraped the surface of addressing.
We need to have a national psychological response. That's a compelling dimension to add to our discussion. Thanks very much indeed for your time and your